About a day late. My apologies for that, but I did want to make sure that I reached out as I finish up grading the discussion forums and getting us ready for this week's discussions in our class. I will point out that no one was able to make it to the Zoom call last week. No worries on that. That's okay. But I would ask you all to reach out and let me know if you're planning on being able to make it this week. If you can't make those calls, we can either make a decision to have them at a different time, or I can take a different approach to providing that content, right? So if you could just reach out to me really quickly and let me know, that would be really helpful. So some core themes that came out of the discussion forums, and I really wanted to point this out. These are structural theories of international relations. They're not approaches, right? And what I mean by that is states may adopt what we might call a realist perspective, but that means a particular leader is hedging that the idea of a realist balance of power will dictate the nature of the system. Just because the state adopts that perspective doesn't mean they're correct, right? It doesn't mean that they're right. They can be wrong. And Kenneth Waltz has this famous quip in Theory of International Politics where he says that leaders who misunderstand or deliberately misconstrue the nature of the international order will be punished, right? That their ability to pursue their actions will be curtailed. So these are structural theories. They're meant to help us explain the sort of nature of the international order at a particular time so that we can understand why we're seeing the outcomes we're seeing. Now, some of the key themes that came out of the discussion forums of liberalism, one was that, and Mike really focused on this, was that it comes in different flavors. Different scholars will foreground different elements of what has been called the Kantian triangle. The three things that liberal theorists argue create a propensity for states to find non-violent ways to address their differences, right? And it's important to note that in each of these instances, it doesn't mean that states just make the assumption to trust each other or like each other. It's that for their interests, they're able to avoid destructive conflict and make their way forward. These are trade, institutions, and norms or democratic quality. So somebody like Andrew Moravchik, who's really actually trying to explain the emergence of a really important institution in the European Union, really foregrounds that idea of globalization and cultural integration, right? Somebody like Keohane and Nye, who are actually talking about sort of the levels of economic and global integration during the Cold War under conditions of anarchy, really focus on trade. All liberal theorists will argue that all three of these things are important, but they'll disagree about which ones are more important or primary and weight them differently, right? So there's different flavors here, and that's important as you start asking sort of empirical questions and thinking through the theory. Also, liberalism can take lots of different forms. Both Chris and Mike really started getting at this. In the sense that, like, the liberal international order, as we understand it, has been very, very directed by U.S.-led institutions, and so on and so forth. But dynamics of trade and other considerations might be making it look different today. Also, that U.S. centrism may still exist, but it may not be all-encompassing, right? It might be the fact that actually that the liberal international system allows us to understand the dynamics of a particular set of actors who are integrated in this way, and that actually what we're seeing is violent confrontations with actors who are outside of that context, right? So that there might actually be sort of like dead zones here, right? And that's perfectly consistent with the theory, right? To expect that states that are heavily integrated in terms of trade institutions and norms will find ways to cooperate. Conflict among them becomes deeply unlikely, and they actually might be really likely to help each other in terms of their own collective security, while we would expect to see violence to occur between them and states that aren't as well integrated. And I think those are some of the questions that Russia's invasion of Ukraine really beg, right? Is this a failure of the theory or one of integration? Does Russia's invasion illustrate that there are shortcomings to liberal theory, which is something that Lynette was really talking about, right? That actually this illustrates that, balance of power is more important, sheer power is more important, institutions won't be effective in deterring or stopping aggression. Or the counter argument is it just simply the fact that Russia is not well integrated and is actually one of those dead zones or islands, right? Which begs a series of questions about the nature of the international order in the near future with rising China and so on and so forth, but those are for a different day, right? Some things that really relate to that are the fact that Russia is not a democracy, right? So already they don't meet one of the legs of the Cantian Triangle, which is why Russia's autocratic nature is really important. Also, Russia's behavior has forced its extrication from many of the systems and institutions that we would have associated with the other two legs of the Cantian Triangle. Russia's economy is deeply inward-looking. It's not well integrated into the wider global environment. But interestingly enough, where it's making decisions to hedge itself and be careful are where it's trying to maintain those relationships with places like India and China. So trade does seem to be playing a role in shaping this outcome. And then also there's the argument that liberalism might explain NATO's robust response. That NATO is so clearly of one mind when not so long ago they were really fractured, maybe because of they're so heavily integrated and now they're facing an external threat, right? So again, what the idea here is that liberalism is a theory about how the international system is ordered. So it tells you what you would go look at and how to think about relationships between states, not what to think of those relationships and likely outcomes. Now you're more than welcome to disagree with that, but I thought that was an interesting theme to bring out. So what are we up to this week? So we're already into week 4. At the end of this week, we're halfway done the class. Terrifying, right? The time is just flying by. This week, we're going to start talking about social theories of international politics. Now, what's important to note about social theories is that they're not materialist. So both realism and liberalism are considered materialist structural theories. They're materialist because they think that the international order does have some sort of real, tangible context, right, that shapes it. So for realists, it's the balance of military power, right, and its changing nature. For liberals, it's the financial incentives of open markets and trades, right, and the nature of state institutions. Social theories actually push this idea that states actually develop socialized expectations of each other through interaction that will shape how they behave, right? And so that means that the kinds of behavior we would expect, the way states will respond to particular kinds of things will be dictated by that social context, right? So these are non-materialist readings of international relations. At least in the early versions, they are still structural, though. We're going to look at the structure of norms, that is, expectations of behavior that states develop through their interaction with each other, to help us explain how it is that they interact with each other. I did want to point out that we do have the Zoom call again, so please let me know if you're not going to be able to make it. And then also I just wanted to point out that not everybody submitted their writing assignment from last week. That's okay, it's a small class. But I would ask you to reach out to me if you have any questions and get that done as soon as possible. So really looking forward to this week. Hope you're having a great afternoon. And I'll see you tomorrow night in the Zoom call if you can make it. If not, I'll see you on the forums very soon.